Why do Silicon Valley billionaires love Star Trek so damn much? Sure, they've got other sci-fi side flings. Mark Zuckerberg swiped Metaverse from Snow Crash, a book literally about how the metaverse is bad, which is kind of like naming your new theme park Jurassic Park. And, as the San Francisco Standard recently revealed, a bunch of top Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, including OpenAI's CEO Sam Altman, are obsessed with the Bobbyverse books by Dennis E. Taylor. You know, that heartwarming series about a sentient immortal AI that was based upon the uploaded brain of a giant Trekkie engineering nerd who saves humanity after World War III? Yeah, no clue why they would like that one. But Star Trek just hits different, you know? The richest of the rich adore it. Like it's a luxury sci-fi brand for billionaires. The Rolex you can only wear if you've launched at least one phallic-shaped rocket into space. And they don't just like it, they name drop it constantly and basically try to treat it like a brand extension of themselves. Bill Gates once dressed as Spock to launch a version of Windows. Jeff Bezos almost named Amazon MakeItSo.com, yes, really, and keeps a model of the USS Enterprise in a Blue Origin lobby like it's a holy relic. And both Bezos and Elon Musk, everyone's favorite billionaire, claim Star Trek inspired them to get into tech.
And when I was in 4th grade, I watched every Star Trek episode in reruns, and many times over and over, they would just repeat them.
Musk even wore a Starfleet Academy patch during the 2024 US election. You know, the one he illegally interfered with.
I'm wearing this jacket that was given to me by the Space Force. It's got Star Trek Enterprise on it. It's like Starfleet Academy. We want to make Starfleet Academy real.
Then he hopped onto his White Genocide is Real app to reiterate it.
Let's make Starfleet Academy real.
And on the surface, a lot of these billionaires seem to love Star Trek for the same reason a lot of people do, myself included. That it's one of the few pop culture depictions of a future that's actually optimistic. Not another story of fascism in space, or an apocalypse, or a dystopia, but a vision where humanity actually got its act together, beyond war and beyond poverty, and went to the stars.
I certainly like Star Trek because that actually shows more of a utopian future. It's not like things aren't horrible in the future. It's there's so many bloody post-apocalyptic futures. Okay, can we have one that's nice?
And we rightly like to laugh at them for it, don't we? I mean, don't they know that Star Trek hates billionaires?
Not everyone on Targalis is happy about the removal of capitalism. We have elitist terrorist cells popping up all over the continent.
Literally, Picard gave a whole speech about how we don't have money anymore.
Money doesn't exist in the 24th century.
Star Trek is woke. It's fully automated luxury gay space communism, baby.
Full Star Trek gay space communism.
God, I love Brendan Lee Mulligan. He's literally the perfect man. The perfect man. Hell, back when Musk tweeted, "Let's make Starfleet Academy real," star of Star Trek Prodigy, Voyager, and the upcoming Starfleet Academy, Robert Picardo, clapped back.
Step 1. Support a leader who embodies Starfleet values like diversity, inclusion, and ethical behavior.
And tons of people cheered at the good old doctor owning Musk like he was Janeway and Musk was a Tuvix.
Doesn't anyone see that this is wrong?
Except, Picardo said that on Musk's own platform, the one filled with Nazis boosting white nationalism and whose so-called AI is explicitly programmed to deny the genocide in Gaza and wants to be called Mecha Hitler. So sure, Picardo did a fun dunk, but it was a dunk performed inside the billionaire's own sandbox, boosting his engagement. All the attention to the tweet just went to prove how much Musk owns the platform where we have these conversations. No matter how much we like to make fun of these billionaires not getting Star Trek's future, we're currently living in theirs. And before all of you say it, cue the Disco Elysium quote.
Capital has the ability to subsume all critiques into itself. Even those who would critique capital end up reinforcing it instead.
And to be fair, Star Trek itself hasn't exactly shunned these guys. Bill Gates visited the Star Trek Enterprise set way back in the early 2000s. Elon Musk himself got mentioned in Star Trek Discovery twice as a great man of history, and even someone who literally got a school named after him. At least they mentioned that it was an awful school.
You're the nicest person I've ever met at this awful school.
Hell, Jeff Bezos himself literally had an uncredited cameo in the movie Star Trek Beyond, buried under unrecognizable latex prosthetics, finally giving him the chance to see what it's like to work 12 hours in uncomfortable conditions for no credit. It's a shame because it means literally one of my top 3 favorite Star Trek movies has a billionaire jump scare in it. But on that note, though, since 2009, all of the Star Trek films have been produced by David Ellison, CEO of Skydance and son of Oracle co-founder, and person who went, literally during the editing of this video, from being the second richest man to the most richest man in the world ahead of Elon Musk himself, Larry Ellison. This is the same Larry Ellison, by the way, who helped Musk buy Twitter because he thought it sounded fun, and also sat on Tesla's board for 4 years, and is also close friends with Donald Trump, and whose company stands to directly benefit from Trump's AI and tech policies, including his company being the frontrunner to buy TikTok's US operations so that the app can legally keep running in this country. These are all the men who've bought the platforms where we meet and imagine the future. From social media, to the internet, to outer space. All privatizing our collective dreams before we can even make them real. And now, Skydance itself just bought Paramount, the studio that owns Star Trek, with funding from Larry Ellison himself. Skydance itself, in appeasement of the Trump administration's fascist policies, recently appointed a new ombudsman to keep CBS News from criticizing the administration, and will likely hand over CBS News to Barry Weiss, whose The Free Press has worked to enable authoritarianism through centrism by painting the so-called far left as just as dangerous as rising authoritarianism under Trump, as well as both sizing Israel's genocide and amplifying Israeli propaganda even as Palestinians starve in Gaza. And promised to kill Paramount's already narrow diversity programs, the very thing Star Trek supposedly stands for. Infinite diversity in infinite combinations. You know, the thing that I love so much that I literally have it tattooed on my arm. So, if Star Trek was always intended not only to imagine something better, but to challenge the status quo and power of today, as well as to be an anti-capitalist, inclusive, socialist future, why are these guys so obsessed with it? Do they not understand Star Trek? Or, when we smugly laugh and say that they don't get it, are we the ones missing something? Is the joke actually on us? What do they see in Star Trek, and what does Star Trek see in them? And what does answering those questions tell us about what it means when our future and our dreams for it get bought? Star Trek is often directly cited as anti-capitalist, most especially early Star Trek The Next Generation under Trek's creator Gene Roddenberry's influence. The first season finale, The Neutral Zone, which aired in May 1988, makes it quite blunt. A 20th century capitalist wakes up from cryogenic sleep convinced that wealth equals power, only for Captain Picard himself to tell him that money and competition are now relics of a less enlightened past.
A lot has changed in the past 300 years. People are no longer obsessed with the accumulation of things. We have eliminated hunger, want, the need for possessions. We've grown out of our infancy.
You've got it all wrong. It has never been about possessions. It's about power.
Power to do what?
To control your life, your destiny.
That kind of control is an illusion.
Gene Roddenberry himself overtly argued that The Next Generation was a future where humanity had shed
a staggering burden of soon-to-be outmoded values and political ideas, capitalistic and other economic assumptions, religious habits, Western industrial world prejudices, and so on.
Star Trek even had the Ferengi, who were initially positioned as Star Trek's new big bad as a replacement for the Klingons from the original series, and were themselves a caricature of ruthless, misogynistic capitalist profiteers, complete with literal phallic space whips. You know, the thing that every capitalist has.
We Ferengi are now challenge this human madness.
I admit, we withheld modern technologies from some worlds.
You see? They are demented. Their values are insane. You cannot believe the business opportunities they have destroyed.
The problem is that Star Trek has always remained vague about what materially replaced capitalism. There's no specifics on resource management, how needs are met, or what systems replaced capitalism's core split between private and public property in Star Trek's future. We do get little hints. Captain Picard's family vineyard or Joseph Sisko's Creole restaurant on Earth both suggest, as YouTuber Rowan J. Coleman argued in his excellent How Star Trek's Future Works series, some distinction between personal and public property, but the franchise never says any of it outright. As one biographer of Gene Roddenberry argued,
in his rush to perfect posterity, Rodenberry failed to delineate just what replaced these obsolete institutions. As a consequence, viewers of both Star Trek and The Next Generation know a great deal about numerous alien cultures, but almost nothing about life on 24th century Earth. That it has become a paradise free of poverty and prejudice is a given, the memes are not. If nation-states have been eliminated, by which culture's rules does the Federation govern? Judging by the evidence, it would seem to be a Western culture, one that adheres to the standard Judeo-Christian ethic that Roddenberry abhorred. And how, one wonders, does his philosophy of infinite diversity through infinite combinations apply to Earth, which boasts countless disparate cultures, if the Federation speaks for everyone?
And after Gene Roddenberry's death, in the mid-90s, studio executive Rick Berman took over running the franchise. And unlike Roddenberry, who was a creative producer, Berman's focus was instead on keeping Star Trek marketable. And functionally, that meant smoothing away anything too political or challenging to modern-day audiences. The canonically gay characters, for example, that Roddenberry long promised before his death, never actually arrived under Berman's tenure. Women were often costumed and shot for sex appeal, and the Federation stayed squeaky clean in ways that made brand managers happy. It was all about brand logic. Protect the 4-quadrant appeal. Not the cool 4 galactic quadrants kind, no, sadly the boring marketing ones, where instead of boldly going where no one's gone before, you boldly went wherever the cultural zeitgeist told you to. And by the early to mid-90s in the United States, that meant aligning with the era's reigning ideology, neoliberalism. Yeah, I know, I said one of the words on the leftist video essay bingo sheet. I hope you already covered the late-stage capitalism free space. But stick with me, I promise we'll get to sentient AI gods and technological raptures soon enough, but before then we gotta deal with old man Reagan. For the layman, neoliberalism was the late 20th century makeover of democracy, recasting it around market logic. Competition, privatization, and deregulation weren't just policies, they were treated like the natural order of the universe. President Ronald Reagan pushed it in the United States and Margaret Thatcher in the UK, and then it spread worldwide, sometimes gently, sometimes at gunpoint. And pretty soon, even the Democrats, supposedly Ronald Reagan's opposition in the United States, were selling the same ideas.
Here, in this place, our responsibility begins with balancing the budget in a way that is fair to all Americans.
Neoliberalism became the overriding ideology of American culture, framing itself as antithetical to a collective socialist approach to the future, the same future that Star Trek was supposedly about.
To increase our national wealth so all will have more, not just redistribute what we already have, which is just a sharing of scarcity. We can begin to reward hard work and risk-taking by forcing this government to live within its means.
And for many Silicon Valley tycoons today, the same ideology at the heart of neoliberalism fuels their worldview. Venture capitalist Mark Anderson, co-founder of Netscape, and Andreessen Horowitz, one of the most powerful VC firms in the world, has poured more money into numerous startups, including AI startups, than almost anyone. And in 2023, Anderson published his Techno-Optimist Manifesto, a 5,000-word credo that reads like the Prime Directive was rewritten by Gordon Gekko, if Gekko also wanted to make sweet, decon chamber-style love to a warp core. We'll go into more depth about what this manifesto is about later on, but at its core, it frames Anderson's entire ideology, and it's built on much of the same assumptions of neoliberalism.
Societies, like sharks, grow or die. We believe growth is progress. Everything good is downstream of growth. Without growth comes stagnation, degradation, collapse, and ultimately, death.
Anderson frames the free market as the ultimate expression of society that drives the utopian future neoliberalism promises, wrapped all in American nationalism.
We believe markets lift people out of poverty. In fact, markets are by far the most effective way to lift vast numbers of people out of poverty, and always have been. Even in totalitarian regimes, an incremental lifting of the repressive boot off the throat leads to rapid rising incomes. Lift the boot a little more, even better. Take the boot off entirely, who knows how rich everyone can get. We believe America and her allies should be strong. National strength flows from economic strength, cultural strength, and military strength. Yeah, I bet that power gets you hard, you piece of... Moving on.
He even echoes the logic that makes neoliberalism dovetail neatly with Star Trek's collectivist sheen.
We believe markets are an inherently individualistic way to achieve superior collective outcomes.
Anderson cast Silicon Valley billionaires themselves as heroic captains.
We believe in adventure, undertaking the hero's journey, rebelling against the status quo, mapping uncharted territory, conquering dragons, and bringing home the spoils for our community.
All of these guys see themselves as the great men, the Luke Skywalkers, who will exit the cave and return to change society for us. See my and Aronok's video on Star Wars for more on that ideology. But it's ultimately a creed, a demand for constant forward motion, an unshakable faith in their hand at the helm of society. And despite its initial collectivist ideals under Rodenberry, Star Trek The Next Generation gradually absorbed that neoliberal logic, shifting from celebrating science and collective problem solving to instead centering risk-taking and individual success. It embraced great men on heroes' journeys. The late Star Trek The Next Generation episode Tapestry is a perfect example of this. The episode is basically It's a Wonderful Life if Clarence were your immortal, omnipotent, flirty gay boyfriend who likes to wear robes and judge humanity from time to time.
But I feel like celebrating.
I don't.
All right.
Said flirty gay boyfriend Q gives Captain Picard himself the chance to relive the day that he was stabbed in a bar brawl in his youth, eventually leading to him avoiding the injury that changed his life forever. But in the altered timeline that Picard returns to, Picard learns that he's a perfectly respectable science officer instead of a captain, someone who followed a safe, predictable career in studying science and technology, and also someone who is destined to stay middle management.
I would like to move beyond astrophysics to engineering or security, something that might even lead to command.
Frankly, Lieutenant, I don't think that's realistic.
To Picard, this job that most of the officers on his ship, the Enterprise D, have, is a fate worse than death.
I would rather die as the man I was than live the life I just saw.
The moral of the story is ultimately that greatness comes from bold, risky, even reckless moves. The kind that might get you stabbed by a 9-foot-tall space biker who looks like they lost a bet with a dental surgeon, but which could also land you in the captain's chair. It reframes Picard's decisiveness and his willingness to stand up for principles, not as the result of belief in a collective of people working together to build you up, or from learning from others and existing in a community, but as signs that he's the right kind of man who should sit in the captain's chair and lead us into the stars. It's pure Reagan-era bootstraps logic, one that subtly casts every single science officer in Star Trek as just a failed captain, and equates success instead with prestige and authority. Even characters who seemed content outside of the chain of command at the beginning of the series, like Counselor Deanna Troi, were eventually given arcs later in the series about earning promotions and wanting to seek command, ultimately equating growth with climbing the hierarchy and proving that you can make the hard calls.
It's not every doctor who gets to command a starship, even if it is the night shift.
And that mindset still lingers in Star Trek today, with Star Trek Voyager's 7 of 9, who was created in the 90s and was once a character who seemed far more interested in science, eventually given an arc where she's written towards becoming the captain of the USS Enterprise G in 2023's Star Trek Picard. It's the same narrative that shapes many of Star Trek's protagonists. The captain's chair, being at the top of the hierarchy, isn't just a job, it's the culmination of a life defined by decisive, risky moments that supposedly foreshadow their greatness all along. And many of these real-life supposedly great men today who embody that ideal have literally walked Picard's halls. A decade before Gates or Bezos, President Ronald Reagan himself toured the Enterprise set. This, by the way, is why so many tech bros latch onto Captain Kirk, specifically as their favorite captain in Star Trek. For example, in December 2023, Elon Musk tweeted at William Shatner,
"You will always be my captain."
While Jeff Bezos, after shooting Shatner up into orbit on his gleaming, overcompensating penis rocket, waited until the poor guy was trying to have a genuine, heartfelt moment when he got back to the ground, then whipped out a champagne bottle in his face and sprayed the 90-year-old down like he just conquered a woman in their frat house. They really just want to fuck Shatner, don't they?
Oh my.
Don't worry, there were sexy girls there. That makes it totally not gay, because you can't risk even a flicker of silly girl feelings like genuine connection or shared joy with another man.
No. Not programmed for you.
Jokes aside though, this moment really does read as homoerotic, because Jeff Bezos is treating Shatner the way that all of these guys treat women, and really anyone that they see as beneath them, as someone to exploit, to perform dominance over, not someone who's a human being trying to share a genuine feeling with you. These guys literally cannot handle intimacy with another man or even person unless it's reframed around conquest, ego, or control. Tenderness isn't allowed. It has to be victory. But they all idolize the character of Captain Kirk because to them, he's the ideologicized American man, the swaggering, gut instinct cowboy, John Wayne in space. And a lot of these qualities are especially emphasized in modern interpretations of Kirk, such as Chris Pine's portrayal of the character in the Skydance films, which, at least justify this change in his character by depicting him as an alternative universe Kirk with a rougher childhood and an inexplicable love for the Beastie Boys.
That's a good choice.
I will stand by the fact, by the way, that needle drop in Star Trek Beyond is one of the best in science fiction. But to them, Picard's the intellectual, and Sisko's the war prophet, Burnham's the overachiever, Janeway's the caffeine-fueled scientist, and Archer, well, Archer's just happy to be here.
Humans aren't like that, Ambassador. We may come from the same planet as those gazelles, but we're pretty much helpless when we're born.
Gotta love your himbo captains. But of all the captains, tech bros want the risk-drunk Kirk, someone who takes action for action's sake, the guy they imagine themselves to be, the kind of person that Musk believes he is when he says,
"You can either be a spectator or a participant."
Kirk's the go-getter, he's not passive, he gets out there and he does things no matter what.
Risk. Risk is our business.
But in truth, the original Shatner Kirk in the 60s often played chess and read books.
Hey man, I remember you back at the academy. A stack of books with legs.
Brings me back again to find I'm not the man they think I am.
The man was a giant fucking nerd, and he listened to intellectuals like Spock, and often thought before he did his double fist punch. But the Kirk in Tech Bro fantasies is a nostalgic monument to a character who never really existed.
He's nothing but a flim-flam, man. He's flim-flam.
A relic of the real man take risks era of America that never actually existed, that they're convinced would be canceled by the woke left today. Hell, the series Very Short Treks has already made that boomer fanfic for them.
I'm sorry, okay? It's important that the Federation make all feel welcome, and I apologize. I'm a dumbass. I screwed up.
What? Asses are dumb to you? Screws are synonymous with making mistakes?
But again, this is the great man of history thinking model in action. Ambitious risk takers drive society forward, or, the enterprise forward, and the rest of us get whatever trickles down from their greatness. I probably could have phrased that better. But this so-called great man of history mentality is what also supercharged Reagan-era neoliberalism. And, if we're honest, it's been baked into American myth-making since the beginning, carried over from Western colonialism. It's the fantasy that history only moves when a chosen few stride forward as if on a hero's journey, carrying fire from the mountaintops down to enlighten the rest of us. But under Reagan, those heroes with 1,000 faces were cast as CEOs, financiers, or men in boardrooms, men whose unique personal ambition and market conquests were acts of public good, and their wealth a gift that would eventually trickle down to the working class.
I urge those great institutions in America, business and labor, to be guided by the national interest, and I'm confident they will. The only special interest that we will serve is the interest of all the people. We can create the incentives which take advantage of the genius of our economic system, a system, as Walter Lippmann observed more than 40 years ago, which for the first time in history gave men, quote, a way of producing wealth in which the good fortune of others multiplied their own, unquote.
In this way, Ronald Reagan echoed Thatcher's insistence that neoliberalism was the natural order of Western civilization. But he specifically wrapped all of this distinctly in American nationalism and exceptionalism.
Is it not my God-given purpose to protect the United States of America?
The message was that the United States wasn't just good at capitalism, it was particularly destined for it. That there was something just so special about America that made it the best version of what neoliberalism could be. And eventually, the marketplace of ideas was where we would prove our strength and inherent betterness to the world. In Silicon Valley, though, that same narrative of a natural evolutionary journey towards destiny is rooted in one thing: technology. Tech billionaires see technology as the engine of civilization, past, present, and future. Take Elon Musk, who loves to muse about the cosmos and humanity in front of giant SpaceX rockets.
I'm aware of no evidence of aliens whatsoever, which means that I think we're probably alone. If you think about how old is civilization, I think the right measuring point for civilization, in my view, or a good measuring point, would be the advent of writing. You kind of need writing for civilization. So it's only been around for like a little over 5,000 years out of 4.5 billion years that Earth has been around and the 13.8 billion years of the universe. So all of human civilization is basically the blink of an eye. I think that probably means that consciousness is incredibly rare.
Musk here is indirectly invoking the Fermi paradox. The question of why, given the size and age of the universe, we humans haven't found alien life yet. Musk concludes the answer to that question is that we're probably alone because, by his definition, civilization on Earth started with writing and only a short time ago. Except, that leaves out a lot, because humans have existed long before writing. Homo sapiens existed for 300,000 years. Human-like ancestors existed for millions more, with things like a rich oral tradition, environmental engineering, and complex societies. Yet Western science often dismisses all of that as prehistory, a colonial framing that Haitian anthropologist Michel Rouf-Troutot calls the production of silence.
Western narratives often denied agency to non-Western peoples by casting them as people without history, or as steps behind a Western model of progress.
In the 19th century, anthropology formalized the idea of unilinear cultural evolution, the idea that civilization is generally on a single track that often ends in what reflects a white Western modernity ideal. And this type of thinking hardened into the civilizing mission, what Richard Kipling framed as the white man's burden, that justified conquest, land theft, and enslavement, and the violent erasures of cultures deemed not yet ready until they resembled their colonizers. It's the same logic that's echoed in bigotry used to justify settler colonial projects even now, like Israel's justification of its genocide of Palestinians through the lie that they are a primitive, inferior culture who are, in their logic, less human and therefore okay to be taken over or destroyed.
They are not the same as us. They come from an inferior culture that is horrible. It kills people for their identity, and it is directly antithetical to everything Western values stand for, and it is an inferior culture in all ways. It is that simple. No, I don't feel bad for them. I don't feel sorry for them. I don't care.
Star Trek itself often mirrors this, treating history as a kind of conveyor belt towards the same eventual endpoint in Utopia, even framing biological evolution itself as preordained. Take episodes like Star Trek Voyager's Threshold, where everyone's favorite ladies' man, Tom Paris, becomes the first person to travel at Warp 10, accidentally causing him to exist at all points in time at once, cause Star Trek, which causes him to start acceleratingly evolve into humanity's future end state.
The only difference between natural evolution and what happened to Mr. Paris is that his changes took place over a 24-hour period. Somehow, traveling at infinite velocity accelerated the natural human evolutionary process by millions of years.
Which is apparently very horny salamanders. Or take the Next Generation's episode Genesis, where a virus makes the crew de-evolve based on their genetic code.
Instead of activating one dormant gene, it started activating all of them, including your introns.
And that's what caused me to de-evolve?
You and every other member of the crew.
Both treat evolution as a destiny rather than adaptations over generations. Or take episodes like The Next Generation's The Chase, where we learn that an alien civilization that just happens to look like a white woman ended up seeding the entire galaxy with life, explaining why so many of Star Trek aliens just look like humans with weird shit on their foreheads. It's the idea that there is a preordained path for evolution to go on, one that will end up reflecting a Western-style civilization. While the term prehistory, with our increasing awareness that it reinforces colonial hierarchies, hasn't been entirely discarded, today, most archaeologists define history not by the presence of writing, but by evidence, whether it be material, cultural, or environmental. Yet despite this mindset still shapes how we think about progress today. It's the same moral sleight of hand that would later be used to justify capitalism. The CEO's burden to uplift the American working man by exploiting them and bringing us all up with him, the trickle-down economics theory that Ronald Reagan espoused. It's just the repackaged white man's burden for the modern capitalist. Capitalism itself is the inheritor of much of colonialism's logic of time and progress as justification for exploitation and conflict. And violent conflict is seen as just the natural part of the evolutionary process.
We wouldn't happen to be invading Iran today, would we? You got me. You got me.
And violent conflict is also, in part, why Star Trek can appeal to both progressives and conservatives, as the wonderful TikToker Seth Duncan explained perfectly.
So, war is hell. I don't think anyone would consider that statement to be controversial. But American conservatives tend to see the world in a very dog-eat-dog kind of way. They tend to consider it an axiom that all life forms are doomed to compete with each other for access to hopelessly limited natural resources, or to advance their bespoke ideologies. And as long as that remains true, violence is inevitable. And because they consider violence inevitable, they take pride in preparing themselves for it. Now, Star Trek isn't a war theater, but it certainly doesn't shy away from the topic of war either. The Federation is almost constantly in a state of conflict, either in an active war or urgently trying to avoid a war. But either way, there's a near constant threat of possible violence. So while Starfleet doesn't consider itself to be a military, and definitely doesn't want anyone to perceive it like a military, the United Federation of Planets still views Starfleet as its only line of defense regardless. So military or not, Starfleet still has to be very, very good at using deadly force. Put Starfleet in a tactical situation, and you'll have most American conservatives eating out of Gene Roddenberry's hand.
Star Trek may not be a war story. In fact, it's usually very anti-war in terms of its messages, but war is always looming in the background. Be it from the Klingons, the Borg, the Dominion, the Borg again, the Breen, the Borg again, or the totally not a poorly handled metaphor for Al-Qaeda. Despite Starfleet's pacifist claims, it still functions as the Federation's military when it needs to, and it's damn good at it. They don't want war, but if it comes, they've got the biggest ship and the moral high ground. It's a very American worldview. Like the Federation, America should prove its strength, take the lead, and set the terms for everyone else, and is always, always the good guy. Speak softly and carry a photon torpedo, as they say. And all of this fits in neatly with political capitalist idea that endless competition is necessary for and inherent to societal progress. Competition, they assert, forces innovation, evolution, and growth. It's survival of the fittest. And it's an overlap of colonial and capitalistic mindsets, one building out of the other. So while money itself supposedly doesn't exist in the Federation, a lot of the assumptions on how economy and power works still exist in that universe. The Federation bids for wormholes, negotiates trade agreements that benefit itself, acts as a landlord at times.
Maybe I don't know much about Ferengi culture, but I do know who holds the lease on your bar.
The Federation. And I couldn't ask for better landlords.
And often exerts soft imperial power that steers other planets' economies into alignment with its own standards.
If Bezos returns to the Dajara system, I have no doubt that its petition to join the Federation will be rejected.
Take out Chief O'Brien, the most important man in Starfleet and a man who, at this point in the series, is helping upgrade a space station that was once engineered by the fascist Cardassians to be retrofit for another non-Federation government. The Bajorans has no idea what a self-sealing stem bolt is used for, despite it supposedly being a common engineering item outside of Starfleet and the Federation.
Why does anybody use self-sealing stem bolts?
I wouldn't know. I've never used them.
Never?
I've never even seen one.
O'Brien's ignorance shows how the Federation operates. As Associate Professor of Cultural Geography at Harvey Mudd College, David K. Seitz notes, the Federation's hands often stay clinging from local exchange while still setting the economic baseline for those it influences.
Chief O'Brien's puzzled unfamiliarity with the self-sealing stem bolt thus tells us something important about the Federation's structuring, even its imperial role in setting the economic standard for Bajor after Cardassian occupation. If the Federation is not so vulgar as to make Latinum its medium of exchange like the Ferengi, its material dominance in Bajoran space is unmistakable, rendering self-sealing stem bolts an obscure currency indeed. The bolts figure as a niche commodity, drag on the easy flow of universal exchange.
Bajor, the planet that O'Brien is helping, can keep its culture and its quirks, provided they align with and depend on a Federation-shaped economy, thereby cutting out other competing civilizations such as the Romulans, Klingons, or Cardassians. And that posture mirrors how the United States operated in the 80s under Reagan, and throughout much of its history, if we'll be honest. The US didn't need formal colonies, it often used economic leverage, covert operations, and development aid to secure resources and markets around the world. For example, under Ronald Reagan, the United States used Saudi Arabian oil production money to help fund anti-communist rebellions around the world. It's colonialism outsourced through capitalism, still exploitative and often propagandized as a moral good. Just as the Federation helps other less prosperous planets like Bajor, America and Western neoliberal democracies state that they are uplifting these countries and bringing them into a better, more just society, often framed against something like communism, to justify their interference in other cultures. These justifications go all the way back to the beginning of the Cold War and continued well past its end.
It is among the unfree and the underfed that subversion takes root. As Ethiopia demonstrated, those people get precious little help from the Soviet Union and its allies. The weapons which they pour in bring neither help nor hope to the hungry. It is the West which heard their cries. It is the West which responded massively to the heart-rending starvation in Africa. It is the West which has made a unique contribution to the uplifting of hundreds of millions of people from poverty, illiteracy, and disease.
The United States continued to carry this logic forward into things like the War on Terror in the early 2000s, justifying the invasion of Afghanistan not only as a mission to stop terrorism, but as a moral duty to liberate women and girls from a supposedly backward society and the misogynistic Taliban. Figures on both sides of the aisle, like Hillary Clinton or Laura Bush, along with countless politicians and political pundits, framed the war as an act of feminist uplift, arguing that American intervention was necessary to save Middle Eastern women through Western values.
Good morning. I'm Laura Bush, and I'm delivering this week's radio address to kick off a worldwide effort to focus on the brutality against women and children by the Al-Qaeda terrorist network and the regime it supports in Afghanistan.
The Federation's post-scarcity utopia, despite its supposed evolution, runs on that same logic. Sell the dream of a better tomorrow while low-key deciding who gets to build it and who gets to own it. Likewise, modern tech billionaires continue elements of this exploitation and justification system. Musk's Tesla batteries rely on cobalt from abusive mines in the Congo. Here in the United States, Bezos' Amazon squeezes warehouse workers while exploiting low-wage labor abroad. So-called artificial intelligence is powered by mass consumptions of water, pollution of communities' air, and massive energy costs. And the human and environmental cost of all of these things is not only ignored, but is treated as the necessary fuel to bring about humanity's destiny, which, for tech bros, is either to upload our consciousness to a server or go to the stars. As Associate Professor of History at SUNY Buffalo, John C. Mohawk argued in his work on how Western civilization's history of conquest often hides behind utopian ideals,
if a group expects that their utopian story will culminate in the production of a perfect world, everything they do to create or react to the conditions that will bring this about acquires enhanced importance.
Basically, if you think you are working to make a utopia, or at least arguing to people that you are, then you have the right to do anything you want to anyone to make it happen. And that's what colonialism, capitalism, and now tech billionaires have always been doing. Star Trek, in a way, justifies that same idea, that there is a natural destined path that we need to follow in order to reach the better Star Trekian future. In an episode of the prequel series Star Trek Enterprise, titled Dear Doctor, Himbo Captain Archer refuses to give a cure to a species dying from a planet-wide disease, ultimately coming to the conclusion that it's part of their natural development as a planetary species to die off, thereby giving the opportunity to the oppressed species on the planet a chance to rise to the top.
I've been studying their genome as well, and I've seen evidence of increasing intelligence, motor skills, linguistic abilities. Unlike the Valakians, they appear to be in the process of an evolutionary awakening. It may take millennia, but the Mank have the potential to become the dominant species on this planet.
And that won't happen as long as the Valakians are around.
If the Mank are to flourish, they need an opportunity to survive on their own.
Well, what are you suggesting? We choose one species over the other?
All I'm saying is that we let nature make the choice.
Instead of, not treating oppressor versus oppressed dynamics as a zero-sum game where one has to die for the other to live, the same mindset that Israel fuels itself upon, saying that for Jews to be safe, Palestinians need to die, the episode leans into a competitive-minded misunderstanding of evolution as survival of the fittest. In reality, evolution isn't about the strongest crushing the weakest, it's about the traits that best fit an environment being favored over numerous generations. And cooperation is often just as important a survival tactic as competition, if not often more so. But both colonialism and capitalism both thrive on this distorted fittest means strongest and might makes right framing. And the Dear Doctor episode itself uses all of this to lay the groundwork for the Prime Directive, the ideology of non-interference we know that the Star Trek's Federation will later adopt, framing the Prime Directive as nothing more than about protecting the natural, quote-unquote, course of evolution over time. In other words, the show justifies the creation of its in-universe ideology by presenting it as the inevitable outcome of humanity's learning to be benevolent keepers of the cosmos.
Beverly, the Prime Directive is not just a set of rules. It is a philosophy, and a very correct one. History has proved again and again that whenever mankind interferes with a less developed civilization, no matter how well-intentioned that interference may be, the results are invariably disastrous.
Humanity, as well as Starfleet and the Federation, are going to be the ones that protect everyone's natural evolutions. We're the ones in charge, the gatekeepers for the destiny that everyone's going to eventually reach. Thereby, we need to come up with an enlightened ideology in order to make sure that this natural evolution is protected.
My people are going to come up with some sort of a doctrine. Something that tells us what we can and can't do out here. Should and shouldn't do. But until somebody tells me that they've drafted that directive, I'm going to have to remind myself every day that we didn't come out here to play God.
And of course, Star Trek the original series makes this not just a policy of the Federation, but a scientific law with its Hodgkin's law of parallel planetary development. The in-universe excuse for why so many alien worlds look like 20th century Earth. Or, more accurately, like whatever could be shot on a cheap Western backlot.
But they are creatures of a heavily industrialized 20th century type planet, very much like Earth. An amazing example of Hodgkin's law of parallel planet development.
But embedded in that budget-saving handwave is the same worldview. All civilizations evolve in the same direction. America's. Some are just late to the party. Which brings us finally back around to Musk's discussion of aliens. Because even beyond the idea that humans have been around long before writing, long before that, there were other forms of life. I mean, dinosaurs, anyone? We made at least one good movie about them. And 6 middling ones. I haven't seen the new Jurassic Park. Y'all tell me if it's good. Life has existed on Earth for over 3.8 billion years. And in fact, opposed to what Elon Musk said, it actually emerged relatively quickly, at least on a galactic standard.
All data that we've ever collected on the fossil history of life on Earth tells us that life began almost as soon as earthly conditions would allow it. It took no more than 200 million years. That sounds like a lot, but it's not. It's just 0.2 billion years of Earth's history. Start the life clock after the period of heavy bombardment and ask, how long does it take to get the first evidence of life on Earth? 200 million years. That's after Earth cooled to allow the formation of complex molecules in the first place.
So in actuality, life may not be rare in the cosmos at all. There are plenty of possible explanations for the Fermi paradox that don't just assume that we're alone. Many of which, by the way, are explored in science fiction. Maybe other alien species don't value communication. Maybe they never invented the radio. Maybe they aren't expansionists. Maybe they have nothing to say to us. I sure don't. Hell, maybe neither of us understands the other's communications method. But none of those possible explanations fit into Musk's worldview, where life doesn't exist unless it mirrors what he sees as civilization. That's the core thing to understand here. Like how Western colonists justified seeing their colonized subjects as not full people by arguing they were primitive, Musk doesn't see alien life as possible because to him, he doesn't respect or see them as worthwhile living beings until they hit a certain bar of technology. This also connects with Star Trek. Because Star Trek is a future defined by technology. Transporters, tricorders, starships, replicators. Star Trek is a universe built on techno-optimism, where many human problems can, and in many cases have, been solved by the right machine. Want to get your favorite sushi? Order it on the replicator. Want to jump across the planet and visit your favorite aunt? Just hop in the transporter. Want to watch some porn? Hop in the holodeck. But in Star Trek lore, the most important piece of technology was its faster-than-light warp drive. Humanity's greatest leap in the universe of Star Trek came when Zefram Cochrane, the creator of warp drive, made his first warp flight, because it led directly to first contact with the Vulcans and set us, humanity, on the path towards becoming and joining and creating the Federation. From then on, warp became codified as the benchmark for a civilization's maturity. The moment a society discovers warp drive, they're considered ready to join the interstellar community. Until then, they're considered a pre-warp civilization.
It appears to be a pre-warp civilization at an early stage of industrial development.
And any pre-warp civilization needs to be left alone under the Prime Directive so as not to contaminate their, as we discussed, natural development.
Pre-warp, so the non-interference directive means we can't warn them. Not that there's anything we could do anyway.
But the word pre-warp mirrors the concept of prehistory. It carries an assumption of inevitability, as if every single civilization follows the same fixed path towards progress, measured only by technological advancement and eventually creating the warp drive. It leaves no room for the possibility that a society might be ready to meet alien life before developing warp, or might choose never to develop warp at all, focusing instead on other pursuits beyond the technological. Or hell, even getting faster than light travel in another way beyond warp, which we see is quite possible through numerous non-warp technologies throughout Star Trek. But baked into the very code of the Federation is this idea that we will hit this technological benchmarker. And a very similar idea exists for tech billionaires. Because the idea to them that certain technologies aren't inevitable is, in the words of one Ferengi actor, inconceivable. As Mark Anderson argues in his techno-optimistic manifesto, technology is the thing that will take us on our manifest destiny. Not into the frontier of the American West, but now into the final frontier of the stars.
The only perpetual source of growth is technology. In fact, technology, new knowledge, new tools, what the Greeks called techna, has always been the main source of growth and perhaps the only cause of growth. As technology made both population growth and natural resource utilization possible, we believe technology is a lever on the world, the way to make more with less. We believe this is the story of the material development of our civilization. This is why we are not, oh my God, this is such a self-important dickhead. This is why we are not still living in mud huts, eking out a meager survival and waiting for nature to kill us. We believe the natural human drive to make things, to gain territory, to explore the unknown can be channeled productively into building technology. We believe this is why our descendants will live in the stars. They'll have to, you piece of shit. You're burning the planet, you motherfucker.
Anderson's essay argues that most of humanity's big problems have already been solved through technology throughout our history, especially technology without guardrails, and that we should do everything possible to accelerate its development. His essay is meant to function as a manifesto for effective accelerationism, a philosophical movement that takes an explicitly pro-technology stance, believing that unrestricted technological progress is the solution to everything from war and climate change to poverty itself. Like many utopian visions, as we've discussed, it assumes that anything is justified in the pursuit of its creation. If technology then can ensure human survival and let us spread our consciousness across the stars, then no limit is too great in order to break to get there. Supporters of this ideology often lean on physics-based scientific arguments, like those from physicist and former research scientist at Georgia Tech, Jeremy England, who offers a kind of Darwinism for the tech bro mindset. England argues that life itself emerges as a way to increase entropy.
I'm an agent of chaos.
Entropy, by the way, in physics is the one universal constant that always rises and will eventually lead to the heat death of the universe. Thereby, England argues that life is therefore destined to expand across the cosmos in order to fulfill that purpose of increasing entropy and leading to the end of the universe, eventually after millions and billions and trillions of years.
Chaos isn't a pit. Chaos is a ladder.
And as we've seen with Elon Musk, many tech leaders assume that humanity is the only civilization capable of carrying out this mission of spreading life to the stars. It then becomes, in their eyes, our manifest destiny to colonize the stars. Because if we, humanity, doesn't, no one else will fulfill the universe's ultimate destiny to end up increasing entropy and lead to the heat death of the universe. And under this ideology, the two biggest drivers for fulfilling this so-called destiny are not only technology, but specifically maximizing both artificial intelligence and humanity's energy potential. Because they believe that both of those things will be the thing that launch humanity to the next level of civilization and eventually out into the stars. If all of this seems to you to have a sort of religious, pseudoscientific edge to it, you're not wrong. Now, not every Silicon Valley CEO treats all of this ideology as literal holy scripture, but most still preach from the same gospel. Take OpenAI CEO Sam Altman, the guy who is literally building ChatGPT, while also at the same time often calling for a massive increase in global energy production.
Energy is an area I've been particularly interested in. I'm much less interested in the sort of things that like compete with subsidies to be barely as cheap as oil or natural gas. But if we can really figure out a way to make energy for a penny a kilowatt, that would be transformational. And I think that's something that people don't work hard enough on.
Meanwhile, ChatGPT itself is using 10 times as much energy as Google, and more than some entire countries. One report even found that by 2030, data centers will consume 20% of Europe's newly generated renewable energy, mostly to fuel our AI-generated bubble. They're basically burning through fossil fuels and siphoning off renewables, all justified by the promise of a future AI-driven human utopia. The logic goes, it's fine to exploit and ravage resources now because one day this technology will save and uplift all of us. It's still just colonial logic, just with better graphics. And it's by no means a coincidence, by the way, that Jeremy England is an open and proud Zionist, and himself has openly advocated for the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, and in 2024 justified the ongoing genocide in Gaza by saying Zionists had the right to control the land of Israel because it was Jews' destiny. So you can see an easy connection between that mindset to the techno-utopian belief that humanity has the same destiny to dominate space. The parallel is quite clear. The same logic that justifies seizing land and controlling people here on Earth is being projected into our visions of the future, with technology as the vehicle and justification all in one. But this brings me back again to Star Trek, because why are they so particularly focused on Star Trek? Because Star Trek isn't Tech Bros' only pull for a technological aesthetic. Just look at Tesla's Cybertruck. It's a stainless steel wedge that seems ripped straight from a cyberpunk dystopia like Minority Report or Blade Runner. In fact, Tesla was even accused in a lawsuit of feeding stills from Blade Runner 2049 into an MLM image generator in order to help promote the Cybertruck. Musk argued that the reason that he made the Cybertruck look this way was because he was making the future look like the future. But it's this exact hyper-focus on trying to copy the aesthetic of what they think the future looks like based on science fiction that they like that explains why Star Trek in particular gets so much of their focus. They are so specifically focused on Star Trek when it comes to technology because it actually already shaped tech and space culture today. Star Trek inspired flip phones, tablets, and voice assistants.
Tea Earl Grey hot.
Padadas are just iPads without Bluetooth. Martin Cooper, inventor of the handheld cell phone, himself credits the communicator as inspiration.
There's Captain Kirk talking on his communicator. Talking with no dialing. That was not a fantasy to us, although to the rest of the world it was. But to me, that was an objective.
But the reason for this, however, is that Star Trek gave generations of engineers and scientists an aspirational dream. The same engineers and scientists whose work these billionaires profit off of by buying them up, slapping their name on it, and saying they helped make it. In 1967, just a few months after the original series started airing, Leonard Nimoy was invited to the National Space Club's Goddard Memorial Dinner, an event that was often attended by the very people who helped shape the future of spaceflight in the United States. And after attending the dinner, he wrote to Gene Roddenberry,
I do not overstate the fact when I tell you that the interest in the show is so intense that it would almost seem they feel we are a dramatization of the future of their space program.
And that belief by many scientists and engineers has only deepened over time. Yet Star Trek has long paired its vision of technological advancement alongside the promise of a more enlightened social utopia. Star Trek has always preached that the Federation has moved beyond structural racism and homophobia, for example. Citizens are shown to have full political freedom, total economic security, and free to develop his or her talents without material worry. We see it with things like Captain Sisko's father, who runs his Creole kitchen without fretting about rent or payroll, just perfecting his gumbo. But underneath the surface, this liberation is framed as the natural endpoint of capitalism's arc, not a rejection of it, and argued that that is in large part because of technology. Throughout the 1980s, Reagan and Thatcher argued that capitalism's uplifting of everybody was ultimately not only moral, but would eventually lead to us having a more utopian state where everyone was equal.
And so the whole of the capitalist society is a moral basis. The basis is that the individual is here to develop his or her talents. He cannot do that without both political freedom and economic freedom. The only kind of society under which you can do that is a capitalist society. To be free, you have to be capitalist.
Thus, as a result, neoliberalism frames social justice, whether it be queer liberation, civil rights, racial equality, as part of the automatic, preordained timeline of capitalism. That if we're all equal to be rich, we'll all end up equally free. A long arc of history that naturally bends towards justice through perpetual growth. No protests needed, just slow, polite evolution. And thus it frames people who speak up and protest against injustice as disruptive or uncivil to the natural order of things. The assumption is, just wait your turn, trust the system, it'll work out eventually, stop being so disruptive. It ignores that change doesn't happen because people wait, it happens because they fight. But Star Trek, though, presents a future where all of that struggle within human society is already behind us. So as a result, neoliberals, whether they be Reaganites or techno-oligarchs alike, can look back at Star Trek's social advancements through its fictions, its interracial casts, its occasional queer inclusivity, and moments when women and BIPOC held command, as instead proof of the inevitable long arc of justice in history, erasing the actual labor and resistance that forced those changes into being for marginalized groups in the first place. Indeed, if you look at Star Trek this way, it mirrors the conservative framing of things like slavery's end, where many conservatives argue that white people were the ones who eliminated it first, when in reality it was numerous people in slavery who fought back against it, such as the Haitians who led one of the first modern successful revolts against slavery. But this conservative narrative recasts emancipation as a benevolent gift from the enslavers.
White people were the first to formally put an end to slavery. In 1833, Britain was the first country in the history of the world to pass a Slavery Abolition Act.
Conservatives framed slavery as an unfortunate but necessary evil in the so-called long arc of history.
It was so common that Aristotle simply considered it natural. The slave-master model was just how the world operated in the great philosopher's day.
As if it uplifted black people by giving them useful skills, technology, and entry into Western civilization. A supposed gift that ripped them from the savage African continent and the culture that they should be grateful to abandon. All so they could assimilate into the clearly better and frankly inevitable Western culture.
If we embraced the patriotic spirit that holds all men are created equal, the patriotic spirit that is our real heritage, then the race hustlers would soon be out of business.
Recasting exploitation as benevolence because it supposedly sped up an inevitable outcome. Suffering repackaged as progress for some greater good that was never for those who endured the brutality inflicted in order to make it possible. Similarly, tech billionaires like Mark Anderson and neoliberals insist that such a better future can only emerge from the exploitation of systems like capitalism, justifying and framing exploitation itself as the engine of progress. And likewise, figures like Musk and Bezos read the technological innovations inspired by Star Trek in the same way. To them, these developments aren't the result of people imagining a better future and working to make it real and seeing Star Trek as the thing that inspired them to do so. Instead, they're signposts along a natural preordained road of technological progress that Star Trek is somehow preordaining and mirroring. Because to their minds, Star Trek is the thing that most looks like what they think the future will inevitably be. Take Sam Altman, for example, who's openly said he's trying to build the world in Star Trek because to him, it was obviously where we were headed.
That was already a time where all contemporary sci-fi was pretty dystopic, but the older stuff, the older Star Trek episodes, those were still like kind of optimistic and cool, and you sort of like saw how AI was going to be great and kind of how that was obviously the future.
Compare how someone like Sam Altman says Star Trek was obviously the future, and how the man who invented the cell phone describes it as an objective.
It was not a fantasy to us, although to the rest of the world it was. But to me, that was an objective.
That man was reaching forward, trying to build something better because fiction inspired him. Altman, by contrast, sees it as something preordained, already written into the fabric of time. So all that's left is to monetize it. That difference is subtle, but absolutely fundamental. One worldview treats science fiction as a spark that ignites imagination and invention. The other treats it as prophecy that guarantees profit, and more importantly, power and legacy. In this telling, Star Trek stops being aspirational fiction that inspired people to create the future and instead becomes prophecy. And if it is the inevitable future then they're the smart ones for trying to be the ones to slap their name on that future and get credit for it. That's why so many of these guys are so comfortable with Star Trek's own narrative shortcut around capitalism. Because Star Trek does sidestep the messy politics of ending capitalism. Things like, a potential workers' revolution, by instead hand-waving at a vaguely undefined World War III, a catastrophe so great humanity had to rebuild afterwards.
Having endured a catastrophic world war, Earth's governments came to this city for the purpose of creating a just and lasting peace among nations.
We never really learn what World War III was about. We get some talk about eugenics. Strange New Worlds even sluttily gestures at the January 6th riot by Donald Trump.
Our conflict also started with a fight for freedoms. We called it the Second Civil War, then the Eugenics War, and finally, just World War III.
But it never exactly tells us what the fuck happened to cause that conflict. And as a result, the Federation that emerges afterwards is a sort of fully formed Western neoliberal democracy in space, carrying all of the same DNA, because we never really had to question what would have changed between now and then. Quite literally, Star Trek pulled a Mark Fisher before Mark Fisher. It imagined the end of the world before the end of capitalism. And so too do today's billionaires, only they're preparing for it. New Zealand has quietly become the apocalypse escape destination for many of America's elite. Peter Thiel, co-founder of PayPal and proud owner of a data mining company literally named after Sauron's evil CCTV or Palantir, even secured himself a passport there just in case the Mordor of his own making gets too hot and he needs to bail, retreating to play out his own personal scouring of the Shire. Other billionaires are buying up remote farmland or commissioning luxury bunkers that make Bond villain lairs look modest. In December 2023, Wired even reported that Mark Zuckerberg was building a $270 million Hawaiian compound on Kauai, complete with 2 mansions linked by a tunnel to a 50,000 square foot underground shelter. The bunker has its own energy and food supply, a concrete-filled blast door, and an escape hatch. It's all basically Fallout DLC and cosplay for the ultra-rich. The goal isn't to preserve the world, it's to survive the end of it and emerge as the technocratic visionaries who rebuild it in their image, because they can't foresee any other outcome. As media theorist Douglas Rushkoff puts it,
the billionaires understand that they're playing a dangerous game. They are running out of room to externalize the damage of the way that their companies operate. The most powerful people in the world see themselves as utterly incapable of actually creating a future in which everything's gonna be okay.
They imagine the end of the world before the end of capitalism because capitalism is a death drive, consuming everything and everyone. If we do follow capitalism, this is the inevitability. And they can't think of any other worldview or possibility beyond capitalism. Thus, they prepare for its end and the eventual Star Trek future that they know will come after it. I mean, Sam Altman, sarcastically, said he believes that his product will end the world. But you know, in the meantime, companies are gonna do great work, whisper, profit off of you so they can build their nest eggs in apocalypse bunkers.
You know, I think AI will probably, most likely sort of lead to the end of the world, but in the meantime, there will be great companies created with serious machine learning.
Nah, that's not concerning at all to hear from him.
Everything's perfectly all right now. We're fine. We're all fine here now, thank you. How are you?
Their fantasy is to pop out after the inevitable end of the world caused by their own capitalist policies as our Zephyrin Cochrane godlike visionary figures ready to build a new society and lead humanity to its predetermined destiny. While in reality, using the bodies of the working class and women and their children to build that future. Like Musk telling the mother of one of his children that he needs to have as many babies as possible with women surrogates in order to make a future of mostly white people.
To reach Legion level before the apocalypse, we will need to use surrogates.
For example, writer Nick Carter recently posted a tweet saying,
"Everyone I know believes we have a few years max until the value of labor totally collapses and capital accretes to owners on a runaway loop. Basically, Mark's worst nightmare / fantasy. This is the permanent underclass thing, and everyone I know subscribes to it."
Here he's pointing out the current tech trend towards a completely disenfranchised workforce, people pushed out of jobs by things like so-called AI. And Mark Anderson responded to this by saying,
"This necessarily would mean productivity growth to the moon. Prices of goods and services collapse. Consumer utopia for pennies per day." What the fuck? A nice use of dropping the crypto nonsense in there with the to the moon shit. It's the most tech bro thing in the world. What it is that I do is literally the most important thing that is happening or ever has happened. Jesus Christ.
He's essentially arguing that we all shouldn't be worried because the future will be just so cheap for the billionaires that they'll support everyone out of the goodness of their heart, handing out freebies like gods in a post-scarcity Trek utopia. It's why they're the ones bankrolling and helping to propagandize the so-called abundance movement, which has started to gain more mainstream appeal after it was championed by abundance book writers Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, and it's now being floated as the shiny new ideology of the Democratic Party in the wake of Trumpist fascism. It's an ideology not about building solidarity with working people or uplifting immigrants or protecting marginalized communities, and it's not even about seriously fighting fascist capture of our institutions. No, it's about blaming progressive policies and social movements as having been a complete distraction and obstacles to growth. Growth being the only important thing.
Sometimes government has to get out of the way, like in housing. Sometimes it has to take a central role, like in creating markets or organizing resources for technologies that do not yet exist and that we need and that are too risky for markets to fund.
The story goes that regulatory frameworks in liberal cities that were meant to safeguard equity and protect the vulnerable really were the problem because they distracted from actual economic innovation. Instead, we should strip those things away and just let tech companies do their things, remove regulations, and wait for the magic of innovation to uplift us all. The problem was Kamala was for they, them, and not Kamala's more of the same mentality. But abundance ideology, which is heavily bought into by many of the elite in Silicon Valley, says it's time to get back to serious business of economics and efficiency, handing the keys to the same oligarchs who built the mess in the first place. This is techno-optimism yet again, skeptical of government and ultimately about turning the levers of control over to tech oligarchs. What's being sold here is just Reagan-era trickle-down economics that's been rebooted for the techno-bro age, repackaged for Democrats who now function as little more than a right-wing neoliberal party in Reagan's image. And just like in the 80s, it's a con. It hands CEOs the mantle of visionary saviors yet again, promising that if we just let them run the show, they'll build us the Star Trek future. Musk, Altman, Anderson, they swear they'll deliver abundance so complete we won't even need universal basic income. Instead, as Musk claims, they'll give us something even better, universal high income. It'll all just trickle down to us yet again, so we can all go open our Cisco's Creole kitchens. Just trust them, just hand them the keys. That's the real reason tech billionaires love Star Trek. They see themselves as its Zephyrin Cochrane. He's the brilliant scientist who, in the ashes of World War III, builds the first warp ship, accidentally kickstarting humanity's utopian future and cementing himself as one of history's great men. Then, in 1960s, the original series, we learn he cheated death thanks to his immortal space girlfriend who keeps him young and vigorous for, well, let's just say the warp core wasn't the only thing she was trying to keep warmed up.
You're very beautiful.
Part of me understands. Part does not, but it pleases me.
I could explain many things.
6.
I beg your pardon.
You give the world its shiny new future, get credit for it, and then you spend the rest of your time hanging out in your private utopia with your hot space partner who keeps you eternally young. You're the visionary genius at the center of history, eternally rewarded in some utopian heaven, untouched by the mess that everyone else still has to live in because you were the one that caused us all to have the rapture. This is why billionaire Peter Thiel has been out there lately giving a 4-part lecture series about the Antichrist in San Francisco. No, I am not kidding about that. God, I wish I had been able to get a ticket to that show. But he doesn't describe the Antichrist as a person, but as a global authoritarian system that, quote, creates peace by crushing democracy and freedom. Basically what we're seeing with Trump right now. And his claim is that the only alternative that we can see right now for the Antichrist is Armageddon, the collapse of society through war, a looming World War III. Where have I heard that before? And Peter Thiel's answer to Armageddon and the Antichrist is about finding balance between the two, not through solidarity or overthrowing these systems of power that lead to these choices, but some symbolic, quote, restraining force that he argues comes from Paul's New Testament second letter to the Thessalonians. Why do all of these assholes sound like they're trying to roleplay Sephiroth?
The way the Antichrist would take over the world is you talk about Armageddon nonstop. You talk about existential risk nonstop. And this is what you need to regulate.
Because under all of their biblical cosplay, it's the same hero's journey bullshit that we've been fed for decades. And that our choices are now only between embracing fascism or endless hypercapitalism that will accelerate us into World War III. And Thiel's only solution is a techno-rapture of oligarch bunkers, floating cities, off-Earth colonies, or survival hatches to survive the fall of society. And we're supposed to accept these techno-oligarchs as our reluctant mythic heroes, saving a chosen few while the rest of the world burns. Jesus fucking Christ. But in truth, Kirk and Cochrane are not the only so-called visionary risk-taker great men Star Trek has. In fact, they weren't even the first. The first great man of Star Trek, the man who tried to write himself into that future, actually says a lot about how better futures are actually built, as well as how even the creator of Star Trek could misunderstand the very future that he was selling. Infinite diversity in infinite combinations, IDIC, is one of Star Trek's most beautiful ideas. It's defining one. It's the Vulcan belief that the greatest beauty comes from the meeting of the most unexpected differences, that every life form, culture, and perspective has something to contribute, that humanity itself won't evolve until we learn to take delight in the differences of others and life forms. It's a statement that says that we can only grow if we stand against bigotry and celebrate difference. It was also an ideology created to sell merchandise.
What is it that you do here? Merchandising.
IDIC first appeared in the third season 1969 nice original series episode, Is There in Truth No Beauty? By this point in the series, Gene Roddenberry had largely walked away from Star Trek after NBC buried the show in a Friday night death slot, leaving producer Fred Freiberger, who was nicknamed the show killer at that point, in charge of the series. Spock actor Leonard Nimoy, always protective of his character's integrity, disliked one, quote,
long and frankly dull conversation
between Spock and another character about their philosophies. And so Nimoy went to Freiberger to ask him to fix it, and ultimately was ignored. So instead, Nimoy went and called Roddenberry directly, who agreed that the scene was weak and promised a rewrite. Nimoy got the pages a few days later, and he felt that they greatly improved the scene. But now the scene highlighted Spock wearing a very specific ornate medallion that was there to express Spock's belief in IDIC. And Roddenberry added that medallion because he ultimately planned to sell replicas of it through his mail-order company, Lincoln Enterprises.
Certainly, I was all in favor of the philosophy behind the IDIC, but not the fact that Gene wanted me to wear the medallion because he wanted to sell them. Where the scene had been problematic creatively for me, it was now problematic ethically.
Roddenberry knew that Star Trek probably wasn't going to have another season, but that it was also incredibly popular with fans, and so was setting himself up to make a nice little nest egg on the back of its popularity once it was gone. From the very start, Star Trek has been both art and commodity, an idealistic vision of the future and a business. After the original series was canceled, Roddenberry himself saw how powerful the fandom around Star Trek was becoming, loving its vision of that hopeful, optimistic future. Fans created conventions, fanzines, and a growing mythology around the importance of the message of what the series had to say. And people wanted to meet the creator of this series. And so, Gene Roddenberry started doing speaking tours. And during them, he started to double down on the idea that he was the legendary great bird of the galaxy. That he was the sole visionary and person who created Star Trek's ideas of a better future. And in doing so, he quietly erased many of the collaborators that helped make Star Trek what it was, like producer Herb Soule, or story editor Dorothy Fontana, or producer Gene L. Kuhn, all of whom helped in their own unique way contribute to much of the philosophy of what Star Trek ultimately became. For example, episodes like Devil in the Dark, which was probably the very first episode of Star Trek to specifically talk about seeing other life forms that are different from us as just as equally valid as life forms as we are, was written by Gene Kuhn in a cocaine-fueled haze over 3 days. Ah, cocaine, the driver of some of Hollywood's best stories. Roddenberry often took ideas that were created by other people and rebranded them as his own. And I did a whole video on this, if you want receipts, but long and short, Roddenberry tried to sell himself as the sole visionary of Star Trek.
When we become wise, when we grow out of this present childhood, we'll learn that quite the loveliest statement in the world is, I disagree with you. And quite the loveliest answer is, wonderful. Please tell me how. I think there is one other thing that was missed by the networks in the studios. Star Trek was a statement, again, as every fan realized, a statement of affection and optimism about living things in general, and about humanity in particular.
And so, when Star Trek The Next Generation launched, Rodenberry didn't see it as just another Trek show that he could make for TV. It was his chance to showcase his utopia finally made real. Humanity in this show was free from interpersonal conflict, didn't even grieve death, and had already reached near perfection. The Federation wasn't striving for improvement anymore, it was the end state. Even Captain Picard was, to Rodenberry, supposed to be that John Wayne-type figure, the American hero with no flaws, ignoring all the flaws and racism of John Wayne's actual characters, as well as the racism of the real person.
During TNG, I mean, I sat across from Gene, and Gene looked me in the eye and said, "You don't understand. Jean-Luc Picard is John Wayne." And I said, "Well, hold it. Are you talking about the public image of John Wayne? Because I got to tell you, I know John Wayne films, and John Wayne has played a lot of different roles. In The Quiet Man, he killed a man in the boxing ring. He doesn't want to fight anymore. I mean, he's played characters who had doubts, who in The Searchers, he was racist. He was, So what John Wayne are you talking about?" And he said, "He's John Wayne. He never doubts himself. He has no fear." I'm going, "Oh, what the, that's not good."
Much like how tech pros idealized the character of Captain Kirk, Gene idealized John Wayne's character to create a sterilized, nostalgic, hegemonically masculine image of the past that he wanted to see himself within. It ignored the fact that most of the stories that John Wayne's character was built out of were themselves deeply racist towards many indigenous Americans, instead just recasting John Wayne as this masculine American man going out into the final frontier. All of this made Star Trek a nightmare for writers because they struggled to tell stories without conflict. It didn't feel human to them. But for Roddenberry, the show was less about giving human drama and more about broadcasting his post-capitalist utopian ideal. Behind the scenes, he fought constantly to keep his name on everything, pushing out Star Trek The Original Series writing veterans like DC Fontana and David Gerrold to ensure that it stayed his future. Much of the writing suffered. Many people consider Season 1 of The Next Generation to be one of the worst in Star Trek's entire run, but that ultimately didn't matter. What mattered was the vision. As Yvonne Fern, the wife of then studio executive Herb Soule, and who herself interviewed Roddenberry extensively in the months leading up to his death, described him,
Gene Roddenberry did not believe in time. He never spoke of the future in the future tense. The future is, not will be. It was present within him.
Roddenberry saw himself not just as a writer, but as someone who already living in that perfect future. All he had to do was make us believe his future was true. And once we believed that, the future would stop being fiction and start arcing inevitably towards becoming his. And that's what all of these men, be they Roddenberry or Bezos or Musk, who have these utopian visions ultimately want, to make their perfect ordered utopias that they believe that they already live within become the future by wrestling everyone else that doesn't see their vision and who are just less enlightened people, and force everyone around them to try to help make that vision possible and erase anyone else who doesn't fit into it. But to bring up this whole story with Roddenberry, not just to make that comparison, but to also draw attention to another one. Because Roddenberry, strangely enough, had a morbid fascination with fascism. And I don't say that jokingly. If you actually look into a lot of the people who knew Roddenberry, it constantly comes up. Susan Sackett, Gene Roddenberry's longtime assistant, remembered that
Gene was fascinated by World War II and anything related to Hitler. We spent long hours discussing his fascination. Whenever I mentioned how evil I thought Hitler was, Gene would disagree. But it is our interpretation of these actions that labels them evil. Certainly Hitler didn't think he was doing evil. He thought what he did was for the good of his country.
Yvonne Fern also recalled having similar conversations with Gene Roddenberry in his final few months. Yet, according to Fern,
what he admires is determination and industry and certain efficiencies that were introduced into Germany during the Third Reich. He admires the fierceness and focus with which an almost impossible task of recreating something devastated, almost dead, is successfully executed in the creation of something strong. One of the hallmarks of his thinking is to separate, to see something good embedded in an evil he once said he was happy to fight. He separates the motivations from the result, and ends up musing about a system that, if it were not designed to obliterate freedom, would facilitate it beyond imagining.
Rodenberry didn't think that Hitler was some misunderstood genius. Nor, by the way, am I calling him a fascist, so don't worry about having to put that comment down below. But he was also seduced by the architecture of their vision. One unified dream imposed through absolute conviction and power, reshaping the world around it to make a utopia. Everyone marching in lockstep towards a single future. Everyone already having a clearly defined role, hell, even having color-coded uniforms. But fascism is antithetical to Gene Roddenberry's own ideas of celebrating difference. Fascism is about explicitly trying to destroy difference so everyone fits into the singular structure that fascism itself is trying to build. And that's the very tension that defines not only Roddenberry and makes him such an interesting contradictory figure, but also Star Trek itself. His insistence that one could somehow extract the efficiency of the Nazi state from its genocidal core portrays a failure to understand how fascism functions in two specific ways. Firstly, that efficiency existed purely in Nazi propaganda and it's
totally made up, pure fiction.
And secondly, that a fascist state requires enemies to define itself.
The Democrats say, please don't call them animals, they're humans. I said, no, they're not humans, they're not humans, they're animals.
It requires heroes and men to grind themselves up for the state fighting these enemies, just as colonialism grinds up slaves and capitalism grinds up the worker, telling them all that they're heroes who should believe in the greater ideals of the nation, the country, or the company. Roddenberry didn't want fascism's horrors, but he was intrigued by the propaganda of one unified dream, imposed with conviction by a singular visionary who reshapes reality and who could pull all humanity towards it. He believed it with an almost religious sense, wanting to birth an inevitable future utopia. And that's what tech billionaires want too. Not to be Star Trek, not even to create Star Trek, but to be Gene Roddenberry, the man who is the future, the man whose name defines the future. It's why Elon Musk can give a Nazi salute at Trump's inauguration and seconds later talk about Mars as if he's offering us a hopeful future. The gesture and the dream are part of the same story, a future where these men get to decide who lives in it and what it looks like. That's all that matters to them. How we get there does not.
Thank you. My heart goes out to you. It is thanks to you that the future of civilization is assured. Thanks to you. And we're gonna take Doge to Mars. I mean, can you imagine how awesome it will be to have American astronauts plant the flag on another planet for the first time? Bam! Bam! Yeah! How inspiring would that be? You know, there's always problems in life. You know, there's this problem, solve that problem. But you know, there need to be things that inspire you. There need to be things that make you glad to wake up in the morning and say, I'm looking forward to the future.
If you're building utopia, anything is justified, right? That's the lie they whisper to themselves as they toss us onto the goddamn pyre. Our bodies just jet fuel for their rockets of lies. Trans people shoved through legislatures, stripped of healthcare, forced into closets, beaten until our names are written in blood. Black trans women murdered while the world scrolls past. Children driven to suicide because adults would rather legislate their deaths than admit they exist as themselves. And Palestinians are burned under rubble, their lives traded for some empire's fantasy of order. Disabled people are left to rot, their survival deemed too expensive for a future that only values those who can be efficient for it. Every day, someone else is declared unworthy of tomorrow. Their perfect world only works if we burn alive to make it run. And all the rest are just sentenced to toil away and build their gleaming phallic monuments they call rockets, towering symbols of conquest aimed at a tomorrow that only exists to escape the hell they've made for all of us. They see tomorrow the way they see everything else, as something they can thrust into, as if they're claiming it, proving they can penetrate the universe and leave their mark. Never a chance to connect, to see, to know someone else. Every launch, every explosion of fire and smoke is just another performance of their domination fetish. A desperate insistence that they can fuck their way into eternity while the rest of us are left smoldering in the ash. All of this is why, ironically and likely unintentionally, Elon Musk's first mention in Star Trek Discovery is perfect. The character who name drops him turns out to be a fascist from the Mirror Universe who is trying to become emperor. Of course he'd remember Elon Musk as a heroic visionary. He even invokes Musk's name to insult Paul Stamets, a gay scientist who is defending the ethical use of science, and instead paints Stamets as selfish.
How do you want to be remembered in history? Alongside the Wright brothers, Elon Musk, Zefram Cochrane? Or as a failed fungus expert? A selfish little man who put the survival of his own ego before the lives of others.
That's exactly how fascists who want to build their utopia see the world. Anyone who challenges progress as they define it, whether it be by rejecting a heteronormative patriarchal order that they are trying to build up, or by refusing technology for technology's sake, is a selfish obstacle stopping their destiny and must be mocked or eliminated. There's actually, as there generally is, a perfect Star Trek episode for this type of thinking, and it appears in the series Deep Space Nine. I think the episode is brilliant in how well it understands how capitalist visionaries see time and the future. In the pilot episode of Deep Space Nine, Sisko meets the Prophets, aliens who exist outside of time, and they can't grasp why linear beings like us value the idea of the future, so Sisko explains it through baseball. You don't know what the next pitch will bring, and that's kind of the whole point of why we enjoy the game in the first place.
In fact, the game wouldn't be worth playing if we knew what was going to happen.
You value your ignorance of what is to come?
That may be the most important thing to understand about humans. It is the unknown that defines our existence. We are constantly searching, not just for answers to our questions, but for new questions. We are explorers. We explore our lives, day by day. And we explore the galaxy, trying to expand the boundaries of our knowledge. And that is why I am here. Not to conquer you with weapons or with ideas, but to coexist and learn.
The joy of being human is much the same way. It's in uncertainty, in becoming, in change. It's a beautiful encapsulation of Star Trek's ethos. Our future isn't defined by already knowing the ending. It's defined by the process of becoming, by the growth we achieve in the act of trying to reach for something better. And yet, power and capitalism hates that. Uncertainty is bad for quarterly reports. If you can't predict the future, you can't invest in it, leverage it, or sell it back to the people at a markup. Which brings us to the aforementioned episode of Deep Space Nine, Profit Motive. In the episode, Grand Nagus Zek, the leader of the capitalistic society of the Ferengi, decides to visit the Prophets himself so he can ask them about the future so that he can ultimately profit from it. If he can know tomorrow's market before anyone else can, he can win and force his version of the future where he continues to maintain his position as the one in charge.
At first, we did not understand the Zek's request. The Sisko said that corporeal beings value their linear existence.
The Zek wanted to understand events outside the restrictions of linear time.
He wanted to see the future so he could gain by it.
Zek ultimately doesn't believe in competition, he believes in being the winner. While many capitalists and neoliberals talk about the virtues of the free market, what they really picture is domination. Monopoly as destiny. Tech CEOs like Peter Thiel don't even hide it, calling competition actually bad and openly pushing for monopolies.
Is that we think of capitalism and competition as synonyms, and I believe they are antonyms. I believe that a capitalist is someone who's in the business of accumulating capital. A world of perfect competition is a world where all the profits are competed away. What I think everybody who is a founder or entrepreneur should aim to do is build a monopoly.
Ultimately, all of these tech oligarchs and capitalists want Blade Runner, or the recent Alien Earth, a future where the nation-states of the future are just megacorporations and run just as efficiently. Jeff Bezos makes the same case, though he wraps it in Star Trek Explorer cosplay.
Because we don't wake up every morning with a competitive zeal to kill somebody else. We're more of explorers, and we kind of invent new ways, and we do wild things. A lot of them don't work. There's a lot of risk-taking, a lot of invention, and that is, it works for us. I think one of the good things about taking a customer-centric approach instead of a competitor-centric approach is that if you get ahead in a particular field of, or a particular arena, then you end up still being very motivated. Whereas if you're very competitor-focused, it's really difficult to stay motivated when you're number one in a particular arena.
Bezos doesn't reject the idea of competition because he's above it like a Star Trekian evolved man. He rejects it because he already sees himself as number one, with everyone else as a customer inside his ecosystem. Elon Musk himself calls for the free marketplace of ideas on places like X, and yet will shove out and ban everyone who doesn't agree with him. And he does much the same thing with his companies. He used Doge when he took over it in the United States to undermine regulators of his companies, gutting the CFPB, kneecapping USAID, and purging the FAA. Mark Zuckerberg himself envisions his metaverse as the default platform for all of human activity in the future. Musk bought X to do the same with the backing of Larry Ellison. Larry Ellison's own company, Oracle, alongside SoftBank and Sam Altman's OpenAI, is now helping Donald Trump build Project Stargate. And yes, it's named after the 1994 film Stargate. Not even good Stargate like Atlantis. Yes, Atlantis is the best Stargate show. But Project Stargate is a sloppy algorithm network wrongly called AI integrated into the Pentagon, stocked with government data, and anchored by 10 new data centers in Texas with the ultimate goal to let these CEOs control the computational space of the future. Musk, Bezos, Apple, Microsoft, Meta, Zuckerberg, they all package their utopias inside corporate ecosystems. Want to use the internet of the future? You'll do it through Meta. Want social media? It'll be filtered through Google, Musk, or even sooner, Larry Ellison. Even the final frontier is being carved up. The International Space Station will deorbit in 2031, crashing into the ocean, and its replacement won't be international at all. Under the Trump administration, NASA acting administrator Sean Duffy signed a directive helping push full privatization of future space stations, encouraging more companies to bid against each other to earn Space Act agreements. Instead of a unified Star Trek-style future, we're splintering into a patchwork of national and corporate fiefdoms. And space will become a chain of Ferengi-run strip malls with even worse food. And if you want to dock at the future space station, well, you better have the right proprietary airlock connector. Back in profit motive, the prophets, of course, find Zek's ideology incomprehensible. To them, Zek's obsession with squeezing profit out of the future is the exact opposite of Sisko's joy in the unknown.
The Zek explained the value of gain, how more is preferable to less. He taught you about profit.
We found the concept aggressive.
Adversarial.
Dangerous. We could not comprehend how any species could lead such a barren existence.
And that's the tension right there. Star Trek's vision of time as open-ended growth versus the capitalist vision of time as a resource to be extracted and monetized. Later on, the Ferengi Quark gives the prophets a speech about how he sees life's true nature. He insists, over a soft swell of the Star Trek theme as he tries to mirror a Star Trek captain's ideological speech, that the drive for private accumulation, for profit and greed, is what pushes all beings to better themselves.
Right, look, I don't know how you people live, but all of us corporeal, linear whatevers have certain things in common. And one of those things is the need to improve ourselves. Our ambition to improve ourselves motivates everything we do. Without ambition, without, dare I say it, greed, people would lie around all day doing nothing. They wouldn't work. They wouldn't bathe. They wouldn't even eat. They'd starve to death. Is that what you want? Are you so isolated and detached that you would sit back and allow the extinction of every corporeal being in the galaxy?
It's the purest neoliberal argument that those who misunderstand Star Trek think it stands for. Individual primacy and hierarchical exploitation is the only real path to progress, which Quark thinks is not the means to the future, but the ends in and of itself. And the prophets reject him outright. They point out that greed isn't natural, it's a self-destructive trap.
Your argument is specious. Changing you will not result in the termination of all corporeal existence.
And their experiment in the episode proved it. They turned Grand Nagus Zek in the episode into a kind, generous man, but not by fixing him or making him into some evolved future version of the Ferengi, but simply returning him to who he would have been had he not been born under Ferenginar's capitalist system.
We discovered that you have not always been as you are now.
We haven't?
There was a time when your people's acquiring nature was not so pronounced.
Wait a second. Are you telling me that you somehow de-evolved the Nagus?
We have restored the Zek to an earlier, less adversarial state of existence.
Quark in this episode is a parody of capitalist mindsets that is just as applicable to today's tech billionaires. Musk, Bezos, Anderson, all men who think they get Star Trek but mistake capitalism for immutable human nature. They're obsessed with the idea that the future is inevitable, that they've glimpsed the blueprint through the Matrix, and that it's their personal calling to make it real. Once you notice it, you see how much this theme is embedded in much of their mythology. Take Roko's Basilisk as an example, an influential thought experiment in Silicon Valley that was created on a forum for AI startup Less Wrong. The Roko's Basilisk thought experiment imagines a future super-intelligent AI that's so powerful it can simulate the past perfectly. And once that future AI exists, it decides to create a simulation of time and punish anyone who knew about the possibility of this future sentient AI but didn't help bring it into existence. And on that logic, you should be motivated to help bring it about now because you may in fact be living in that simulation. So the moment you hear about the Basilisk, sorry by the way, you're now trapped in its game. It's a warped sci-fi version of Pascal's wager. It's better to believe in God just in case God exists, except for here, God is an all-knowing robot with a grudge. And while that sounds absurd, many in tech circles take the underlying premise seriously. It's a tech bro reinvention of rapture ideology, that one must believe and make the rapture, singularity, occur so as not to be punished by Jesus. The AI, when it does. In Mark Anderson's Tech Optimist Manifesto, he writes,
"We believe any deceleration of AI will cost lives." Fuck, God, I can't do this. God damn it. We believe any deceleration of AI will cost lives. Deaths that were preventable by the AI that was prevented from existing is a form of murder. Oh, God, I feel so fucking gross reading that. You have to let me continue to develop AI, stealing stuff from every single person who has ever interacted with anything, while at the same time eating up the precious resources of the planet, most especially water, is important because at some point in the future, the technology I design might save a person. Do you understand how many fucking people's lives you are making worse by this shit existing? He understands, he doesn't care.
In Anderson's worldview, refusing to build the AI future is not just short-sighted, it's an act of violence towards non-existent future humans. It's the idea of effective altruism and long-termism that PhilosophyTube did this excellent breakdown of. Go check that out because she breaks it down better than I can. But to them, the future is a fixed point, a straight line, and their role, the role of any visionary CEO, is to drag the rest of us towards that torment nexus, utopia, even if it kills us. Better a dead future they control than an unpredictable one that they don't. Again, take Sam Altman, who when directly confronted with a question about people losing their jobs to his so-called AI by 2035, instead gets nervous trying to imagine that apocalyptic future, dodges the question and instead gives unspecific aphorisms about humanity going to the stars and looking down on us poor humans today because we didn't have the technology to do so. We're just so backwards.
So we're college graduates in 5 years. What do you hope the world looks like for us? I think there's been a lot of talk about how AI might cause job displacement. What are the things that we could look ahead if we're thinking about
in 2035, that graduating college student, if they still go to college at all, could very well be leaving on a mission to explore the solar system on a spaceship in some kind of completely new, exciting, super well-paid, super interesting job, and feeling so bad for you and I that we had to do this kind of really boring old kind of work and everything is just better. 10 years feels very hard to imagine at this point.
Because it's too far?
It's too far.
Sam Altman and all of these tech CEOs have no actual vision, no actual desire to help people today, just vague utopian promises while barreling ahead with his Roko's Basilisk-style religious mission to cause the rapture. Sorry, I mean the singularity. My tongue keeps getting twisted there for some reason. Anyways, he wants to build that super intelligent chat GPT with no thought to the human, environmental, or cultural cost, or, importantly, if it's even remotely possible. Because, it's not. Let me be clear, don't buy into the propaganda. Humans are not going to create a super intelligent AI, at least based on how MLMs like ChatGPT operate. But it's ultimately just propaganda hype that OpenAI and Altman push to make themselves look like they're the ones going to bring about our sci-fi future instead of people like Musk or Bezos who are building rocket ships. That's why I get so frustrated with people like YouTuber Cleo Adams who interviewed Sam Altman. She literally opened the video by parroting Altman and OpenAI's propaganda that they're building a superintelligence, and never once challenged that framing or even questioned the assumption at any point during the interview on whether such a thing could be built the way OpenAI is attempting. And this isn't me trying to do a call out of Cleo Abrams. She's just an example of something that many people are doing right now, but her whole piece came off as little more than a promo for ChatGPT 5, framed exactly the way that Altman wants it, as if he's trying to make the Star Trek future real.
I'm about to interview Sam Altman, the CEO
of OpenAI.
OpenAI.
Reshaping industries.
Dude's a straight up tech lord, let's be honest.
Right now, they're trying to build a super intelligence that could far exceed humans in almost every field. And they just released their most powerful model yet. Just a couple years ago, that would have sounded like science fiction. Not anymore.
We made this one up. It's fiction.
And if you present it uncritically, people will believe that propaganda. And tech pros may even convince themselves that Altman is the Virgin Mary about to birth the singularity. But what ChatGPT, or any so-called radical disruptive technology these oligarchs hype as what will bring us to the future while conveniently owning the companies behind them, is really about is creating dependency. Trapping people in a decaying orbit around a technological black hole, each CEO competing to become the singularity that devours all the others until we're all dragged past the event horizon with no escape. It's the slow motion hollowing out of society in service of a fantasy future, a warped, corporatized facsimile of Star Trek's utopia. All of these CEOs think about the future in the exact same way. Take Jeff Bezos.
It's really hard to know what Amazon will look like 20 years from now because so many things change. You can't really base a strategy on a technology or who your competitors are, or those things change so quickly. But the one thing that I think you can really count on in any field of endeavor is your customers and what their needs are.
To Bezos, the future should be predictable, because predictability is stability, stability is control, and control means he gets to be Zefram Cochrane, Gene Rodenberry, the one who saw it all coming and made it happen. He wants to still see the future as full of customers, rather than thinking about how to actually help people, because he fundamentally sees the future and everyone who lives in it as something he can exploit. And the further ahead that he can predict that future so he can exploit it even more, the better. It's no wonder he spent decades funding the 10,000-year clock, a massive art project designed by former VP of Research at Disney Imagineering Daniel Hills that is meant to symbolize long-term thinking.
Symbols can be very, very valuable, and we have, as a species, become so omnipotent on planet Earth that we're really going to have to start thinking longer term. It can, in a lot of different ways. And you can accomplish so much if you think long term that you can't if you think short term. So if I said to you, I want you to take this mission, I want you to solve world hunger in 5 years, you would rightly just turn down that mission. You would say, that's not possible, why would you even bother trying? But if I said to you, let's solve world hunger in 100 years, now that's actually much more tractable. Now you can think about it and you can say, okay, well, how do we create the preconditions that are necessary to solve world hunger? And so long-term thinking is a huge lever, and I think it gets harder to do as the speed of invention and civilization changes, in part because it sometimes doesn't make sense to think long-term if everything is changing so quickly. That's why, kind of taking that back to the customer needs that I was talking about before, you need to find those things that we know as a society that we'll want even 100 years from now. and then make sure that we go about working on those things.
But Bezos ignores the fact that he has the resources to end world hunger today, not 100 or 1,000 years from now. In 2022, the UN World Food Program Executive Director David Beasley stated that it would take only an estimated $40 billion each year to end world hunger by 2030. Less than 20% of what Bezos is personally worth. He could commit a fraction of his fortune, a fraction, partner with governments and NGOs and see real change in his own lifetime. But his philosophy of time pushes these solutions into some vague centuries-away horizon because the point isn't actually solving world hunger, it's securing the future as a space that he owns. If you actually look at physics, time isn't something that's fixed. It's relative, shaped by your position in space, how fast you're moving, and the gravity around you. The more massive an object, the more it bends space-time, slowing time itself nearby. Tech oligarchs want to be that massive object, a black hole of capital and influence, warping time so we all live inside their event horizon, trapped in their versions of the future. A lot of all these things that I've been saying in this video, though, I think a lot of you probably already intuitively understood on some level. But the thing that I really want you to understand here is that underneath all the slick utopian branding of techno-fascist futurism is one thing: raw fear. Their rush to colonize space or trap us in the metaverse or to build the super intelligent AI isn't about saving humanity or even really about controlling the future so they can dominate it. What it's really about, deep down, is about saving themselves from death. They're terrified of their own death, every single one of them. Take Elon Musk's obsession with having as many children as possible. It's textbook reproductive futurism. The belief that your legacy only survives if the future is populated with people who think, look, and act just like you. Little copies of yourself out into the future that means you get to have some form of eternal life. It's the same anxiety that fuels his white genocide tweets, that fuels any sort of racial eugenicist ideal. Just here reframed in sci-fi packaging. Take out when Mark Cuban asked how many kids Musk was planning to have, Musk replied,
"Mars needs people."
But this is why they control women's bodies, workers' bodies, everyone else's autonomy, because they just want to stop themselves from death. They dream of various versions of immortality, a future where history remembers them as the visionary who saved humanity, or their name carved into monuments, or their consciousness uploaded to the cloud, or their bodies kept from ever decaying. Hell, the goal of Les Wong's Eliezer Yudkowsky is to quite literally, as tech writer David Gerard points out,
live forever as a human mind running as a process on the future superintelligent AI God computer.
Literally, their argument is that we must cause the creation of this superintelligent AI so that we can all live forever because the future AI God will revive every living person eternally. Again, it's just the rapture. It's just Jesus. It's just heaven above us and God above, this eternal paradise that we're all meant to live within. They're all just stories of control. But whether it's Musk's need to have as many babies as possible to populate the stars, or AI immortality, or shit like tech CEO Brian Johnson infamously transfusing his teenage son's blood into himself to keep himself from getting young, it's all the same impulse. Control the future so completely that they can live eternally and avoid death in some way, shape, or form. But human fear of death is really a fear of change, of time itself. We can imagine the future as humans, which means we can imagine our ending. And that knowledge drives some to hoard, to freeze the present, to shut out anything that might change it. But time isn't a straight line to be locked down, it's a shifting web of possibilities, as Captain Sisko himself said. Immortality doesn't come from clinging to the self, it comes from change, from living on through community, from caring for what comes next after you. In both physics and Star Trek, time isn't a perfect circle that returns to itself. Time only exists because things change. If nothing changed, there would be no time at all. Time isn't a river endlessly flowing forward, it's a measure of transformation, a remembrance of what has come before and how it's different from what came after. We only perceive time because of our pain, our traumas, our memories of the past, and how they are different from where we are now, because we've become something different, both in our own lifetimes and after it, as a society, as a culture, as a universe. It's why it's important to hold on to our memories of the past, but not be defined by them, not try to hold on to them, not try to idealize them and press them into the future. We shouldn't fear change, because change is time. It's inevitable. It's the only thing that is. It's the only thing that keeps the universe alive. Despite correctly understanding its reflection of Western colonial impulses, tech oligarchs still fundamentally misunderstand Star Trek because they fundamentally misunderstand what it means to be human. To them, Star Trek is their utopia, ordered, perfect, and familiar. It's not about surpassing the present, it's about preserving it to them, or rather, the nostalgic past they grew up idolizing, just with better gadgets. And for any neoliberal, it's America as it was in the 60s, the 80s, that we need to make great again in the future. Fascism itself thrives on that logic. The future is a recreation of the past, an endless Ouroboros imposed upon the present. Star Trek to them isn't a challenge, it's a return. And they see themselves as the chosen ones who will bring it back. Those heroes on those heroes' journeys. They are the spawn of every system of power and control that is fed upon the next one. Organized religion, colonialism, white supremacy, capitalism, nation-state nationalism, techno-fascism. All stacked like rotting bricks in the same collapsing tower. Each one props up the other, recycling the same lies until they mistake themselves for prophets instead of parasites. They sell a flawless future that can never exist because it's nothing more than a fetishized, airbrushed version of a past that never was. Chasing that mirage, they'll sanction any atrocity, excuse any cruelty, so long as their name is etched on the blueprint. The belief that if they brand the future as theirs, they'll never truly die. And the future doesn't begin on our social media platforms or the internet or outer space. It starts first in how we dream of the future. That's why people like Larry Ellison have pushed to have 27.5 voting rights in Paramount's board post-merger, why Jeff Bezos paid to send Shatner into space, and why modern Star Trek film sets look like an Apple store. Because they want to push to make our dreams of the future look only like theirs. They covet Star Trek's look, not its soul, turning its promise of exploration into a showroom for their ideology. If they control the aesthetic, they control the blueprint of how we dream. So every vision of tomorrow is built inside the borders of their worldview. When in truth, dreams are boundless. We dream about what's beyond the edge of the map, not what's confined within its edges. Stories like Star Trek are being hollowed out just as vehicles for nostalgia. Look, Captain Kirk is back. Look, it's the Enterprise again, and again, and again. Don't you just love living in the Star Trek utopia? They ignore that Star Trek used to have actual commentary baked into it from the beginning, not just enjoy the fun little space zoom pew-pews. Because in clinging to the mythologized past, they miss the actual truth entirely. Star Trek's future was never a fixed point, it's a reach. It's flawed, it's contradictory, and shaped by the baggage of capitalism, colonialism, and preordained Western timelines, yes, but it's still always a reach for something new beyond that. At its best, it imagines a world that grows because we choose to understand, not control, one another. A future that evolves through change, through learning, through the messy, imperfect work of connection. In Star Trek, the future doesn't arrive because of technology. The Federation doesn't exist because Zefram Cochrane built a warp drive. It happened because we met the Vulcans. We met someone else who was unlike ourselves and started to realize that we weren't alone and became curious at what else was out there, to learn who else was out there. And Zefram Cochrane wasn't a great man who did it alone. He worked alongside Lily Sloan, a black woman who was erased from most of Star Trek's history books, as well as our remembrance of who created the warp drive. And Star Trek's future is built by collectives, by people who inspire each other to reach further than they could alone. And so too is our future been built by that same impulse. People like Nichelle Nichols helped recruit more women, especially black women, for NASA. Mae Jemison, the first black woman in space, credits Nichols for inspiring her. The International Space Station commander Samantha Cristofetti told Deep Space Nine actor Nana Visitor that the show shaped her career. One of my closest friends in the world and Star Trek scientific advisor, Dr. Erin McDonald, credits Captain Janeway herself for inspiring her to finish her PhD in astrophysics. Just as countless other women credit Star Trek with inspiring them to join STEM. And numerous philosophers, artists, politicians, and creators of every kind have drawn from Star Trek in order to try to create their own visions and stories and art and trying to make a better world. And many people just found themselves through Star Trek. I mean, I know a trans woman who works as a YouTuber and is now pursuing a career as a film director who credits Star Trek for both of those ambitions, for sparking her desire to tell stories on screen, and for giving her the language to understand herself, myself. In characters like Jadzia Dax, I saw a future where I could exist fully as myself, a reflection of who I could be and a vision of what humanity could become as part of it, as part of a whole that accepted me, not that tossed me aside. Star Trek isn't a sacred text that we're fated to make real. It's an aspiration we reach for, and in reaching, make better than a show like Star Trek could ever imagine. We saw ourselves in the alien and realized we weren't so different from each other. At its core, Star Trek isn't about outer space technology or even the future. It's about exploring what it means to be us, both the self within and the connections that bind us to one another.
The most profound discoveries are not necessarily beyond that next star. They're within us, woven into the threads that bind us, all of us, to each other.
And it's because Gene Roddenberry, for all his flaws, and all those who have worked on Star Trek, had something today's CEOs have always lacked: curiosity, empathy, and the capacity, no, the desire to be changed by others, to let the world change around them and be okay with that. To the tech CEO's mind, that's too terrifying. In sci-fi author Robert Heinlein's novel, Stranger in a Strange Land, the word grok is a Martian word meaning to understand something so completely you merge with it. And after Star Trek the Original Series' original run was canceled, Trekkies wore t-shirts that said, "I grok Spock," because Spock, the ultimate other, embodied infinite diversity and infinite combinations. He was not an alien, but someone that we understood as us. And Spock defined Star Trek. Kirk is made better because of Spock. Spock is made better because of Kirk. Spock himself finds that he is not defined by his human and Vulcan sides, but as something that is uniquely him. Each thing changes the other that it touches. Tech billionaires flatten that into techno-fascism, afraid to let anything change them, only defining the future by themselves. Now, grok is synonymous with an algorithm that Musk changes on a whim to make reflect his white genocide as real fears, twisting a word that was meant to mean deep understanding into something that is used as a tool for someone else to control. Because that's how these tech CEOs see all of us. Not as people to understand, but as resources to be owned, managed, and used up. Hell, Musk's own daughter, Vivian Wilson, came out as a trans woman and publicly cut ties with him, and for Musk, that was his red pill moment, a shift to him fighting woke ideology, not because of gender itself, but because she rejected the future that he had scripted for her, where she was just another little copy of himself sent out into the universe to just be him in the future. She rejected his story of Musk himself as Adam in the Garden of Eden, ordained to name and control everything beneath him. Trans people are living proof the future isn't inevitable or pre-written, as are any marginalized person existing today as themselves. We each choose who we are. We make ourselves. And for men like Musk, that's terrifying, because if people can choose a future beyond their control, they can choose a future without them. And that's what we need to do. Choose a future without them. It is true that capitalism subsumes all critiques of itself, and Star Trek is just a projection of the future based on the biases and assumptions of our present. But it is also true that we build our collective futures, our actual collective futures, within the oppressive and controlling present. We resist the defined, pre-planned destinies imposed by the powerful by building our own within their endless looping present and break out of it. Star Trek has never been about its utopia, but the people in that future still striving to grow, focused on becoming their better selves, never getting there, but always trying.
It is the struggle itself that is most important. We must strive to be more than we are, Lao. It does not matter that we will never reach our ultimate goal. The effort yields its own rewards.
You can see that within Star Trek itself, within the character played by the man who roasted Musk on his own platform, Robert Picardo's The Doctor. At first, the Doctor is just the Voyager's emergency medical hologram, programmed to treat injuries, then shut down and never have an existence on his own. He isn't even considered a person by most of the crew and even the captain.
You wouldn't even be considering this if they were flesh and blood.
I'm not going to let you turn this into an argument about holographic rights.
Why not? That's exactly what it is.
But over the course of the show, as he learns that he can be more than just his pre-programmed role, he fights to express himself, to name himself, to prove that he's more than just a tool for someone else to use. In the episode Author, he even writes a thinly veiled holonovel about his experiences with prejudice aboard the Voyager. But the Federation reviews the book and rules that as a hologram, he has no legal rights, not even to own his own work. But he still tried to express himself, and that mattered because in the end, while the book is withheld, it still leaks. And other holograms just like the Doctor find it. These same holograms are being forced to work as labor in dilithium mines, but they share it in secret. And it slowly becomes a spark that makes them realize they can be something more. A manifesto of sorts. Something that they can build solidarity around, because it's a story that says you are people, not property. Star Trek has already written the parable that Musk doesn't understand. AI in Star Trek isn't about a shiny new toy for billionaires to make themselves gods upon. It's a metaphor for marginalized people demanding recognition, dignity, and freedom from exploitation. Star Trek has always been a collective story. A story that is not inevitable, but one that we must seize for ourselves in order to reach for it. Because in the end, the story is ours, or it's nobody's.
We must learn to value the difference we find in other people. If we cannot handle the small variations we have here among our own kind on Earth, then God help us if we get into space and see the variation that is almost certainly out there.
In case you didn't get it, and if I'm being too subtle, what I'm saying is to make the Star Trek future, we need to build a kind of class consciousness and solidarity, because that's the only way we get a better future. And as Star Trek once said directly to a capitalist's face,
"Workers of the world, unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains."
Hey there, interwebs. This is Editing Jesse, who just finished this video. I'll try and keep this short because I was trying to keep this under 2 hours, though I think I failed at that. But I just wanted to say thank you all for watching and supporting. Being kind of frank, I've been going through a lot of depression lately for probably obvious reasons if you looked out at the world, as well as some personal things that have been going on in my life. Don't worry, I'm doing okay, but it's been rough. And I just want to say thank you for watching and supporting and, you know, just supporting each other through all of the bullshit that's been going on right now. I did want to say I do have some big projects coming up, including some ones that I haven't announced yet that this video is actually kind of a tangential part of that I'll hopefully be able to announce sometime in the next few months, if not early next year. I'm kind of working on it because it kind of had a few setbacks recently. But I just wanted to say, if you want to be able to support me in any of those projects, please do consider supporting me over on Patreon. Just being frank, as many of you know, YouTube has been kind of shit for a lot of creators lately, and there's been other things like me trying to figure out how to get out of this country and other stuff like that that is just causing a lot of money worries. So if you can support me and you want to see more videos like this or other videos that I'm doing or help me on my other projects, Patreon is the place to do it. But if you can't do that, I totally understand. We all have a lot of stuff going on. I just hope you're all taking care of yourselves and sending you love, and I look forward to hopefully getting you the next thing and all the other stuff that I have planned in making kind of hopeful things, even in a world that is making it harder to be so. Take care, y'all.